So, as we mentioned a couple of times earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu is in town this week in D.C. to meet with Trump once again. To analyze this, the possibility of any sort of a ceasefire deal, what's going on in Iran, and all sorts of other things. We're lucky to be joined by Jeremy Scahill, of course, co-founder of The Intercept. Great to see you again, Jeremy. Thanks for having me back. So, let me just start with that question. What do you think the consequences will be? What sort of things are going to be discussed at this meeting between Netanyahu and Trump? Well, you know. Of course. Donald Trump has said this is the final proposal for a Gaza ceasefire. What we've seen over the past week or so is a process where the Israelis have essentially been negotiating with themselves within Netanyahu's power structure, deciding what positions they want to stake out. The proposal that Trump put forward was drafted in consultation with the Israelis, primarily with Ron Dermer, who is Netanyahu's lead official dealing with these negotiations. Hamas, for its part, didn't do much in terms of revising the document. But they did zero in on 3 key things that they wanted changed. Basically, one of them is they want stronger language from Donald Trump confirming that he will continue to force Israel to hold its fire beyond an initial 60-day period so that a permanent ceasefire can be declared. Israel has pushed back very hard on that. They want to be able to resume the military assault on Gaza after 2 months if Netanyahu decides that's what he wants to do. The second is that they wanted a reversion to the original ceasefire agreement's map positions for Israeli forces to withdraw from Gaza. Netanyahu has been saying that he wants to stay in the south of Gaza, that they want to create a zone along the Egypt border and try to force all of the Palestinians, 2 million plus Palestinians, into this small sliver of the Gaza Strip. And then presumably, they think that they would then fight a guerrilla war against Hamas fighters in the rest of the Gaza Strip. And then the final term that Hamas wanted changed had to do with aid. And this is the one that I'm told this morning by Hamas officials is most central right now in the negotiations. Hamas wants unrestricted aid to flow into Gaza. And they don't want this deadly aid scheme, cynically known as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to be in any way involved with the distribution of aid. So, you have a delegation right now that Netanyahu grudgingly sent to Doha, Qatar. And I was told by a Hamas official this morning there's been absolutely zero progress in those talks. Another Palestinian close to the negotiations said that if Netanyahu insists on Israel controlling the aid, it could be a deal-breaker. But all parties involved, including Hamas, know that what's happening right now in Doha is irrelevant. All that matters is what happens between Netanyahu and Trump. If Trump decides he wants a deal, he's the only person in the world that can force Netanyahu to accept terms that he doesn't want to accept, as has always been the case. Yeah. And you broke this down in your Intercept report, which folks just saw up on the screen and can read and go into great depth and detail on. Jeremy. So, could you also flesh out for us what some of that stronger language might look like? Because when I hear that, at least, I think stronger language. But does the stronger language still leave wiggle room for Netanyahu? And would that be part of something that Trump sort of comes to the table and says, you've got to have the stronger language. We'll agree to the stronger language. But wink wink. That's just stronger language. It's language at the end of the day. So could you tell us a little bit more about what Hamas is looking for when it comes to the language? I mean, this is a really important question. I think it bears repeating that Israel has constantly violated ceasefire agreements, including the agreement that Donald Trump and Joe Biden pushed through. That original January agreement wouldn't have happened without Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff. And Israel killed more than 160 Palestinians during that ceasefire. Then it unilaterally abandoned it and resumed the military assault on Gaza on March 18. And so, as the discussions have happened, Emily, over the past couple of months since that ceasefire was blown up, Hamas has been pushing U.S. mediators, and there have been some direct talks between the United States and Hamas. Something that Joe Biden wouldn't do. But Trump has done. And during those talks, the Palestinians have said, you know, we hear what Donald Trump says. That he wants to end this war and he wants it to be definitively ended. But we need to have Israel bound to that agreement. So, you know, it may seem like it's splitting hairs. But what Hamas wants is very clear language that states that the United States, Egypt, and Qatar are the regional mediators dealing with this ceasefire negotiation process, that they want them to guarantee that while Hamas and Israel negotiate a final resolution to the Gaza war, the terms of the 60-day initial truce are going to apply. Meaning Israel will not put a blockade on aid, and meaning that Israel is not going to violate the ceasefire. Hamas knows that Israel will likely violate any agreement that it signs. So, they're sort of struggling to find what is the best that we can get in this situation. And they believe that by having Trump publicly state that he is going to keep Israel in check because he wants a permanent end to the war. Now, we can talk about Trump's agenda and what he wants to see happen as a result of it. But there are indications that Trump actually does want this resolved. He also likely wants to expand the so-called Abraham Accords. He may want to make a deal with the decrepit, corrupt, unpopular leader of the Palestinian Authority. Whatever happens next, Hamas understands that it really only matters what Donald Trump wants and is willing to do right now. So that's why you see what appear to be kind of minor language changes actually meaning something to Hamas. And look, if you put the two versions next to each other, there is a big difference because they took out hedge language. They took out vague phrases like, if necessary. They removed just Egypt and Qatar being the guarantors of that and reinserted the United States. It's possible that Trump is going to grant some concessions on this. The bigger issue, however, is likely going to be where Israeli troops withdraw to if a ceasefire is signed. Because Netanyahu is saying they're going to remain there no matter what. And then this other issue of the aid. I mean, it's an unspeakable situation right now in Gaza. And I'm told that that is actually the main issue that is being debated and discussed right now. So let's actually skip forward to talk more about that aid situation. The quote-unquote Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that has been running these aid traps and corresponding massacres. There's an interview recently with the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Now, this is the guy who replaced the original guy who stepped away after saying, I don't think that this is a good idea anymore. This is E3. Guys, let's go ahead and play a little bit of this interview, and then I want to get Jeremy's reaction on the other side. Interviewer, we have spoken to doctors. British doctors. Western doctors. Eyewitnesses on the scene who tell us that almost every day they are coming under fire from Israeli forces trying to get to the aid point. Just before and as they leave, they are being fired on. What are you doing to ensure their safety? Reverend Johnny Moore, I don't think anybody knows entirely what's happened in the Gaza Strip. From our point of view, based upon our experience on the ground, we don't see the evidence of this degree of mass casualties directly related to people seeking aid. Interviewer, because you have absolutely zero way of verifying who's taking that aid. Reverend Johnny Moore, while we can't verify that every individual pack of, flour, For instance, isn't somehow ending up in some place that it wasn't intended. What we can absolutely verify is that there is no mass diversion issue. Interviewer, based on what? Because you're not verifying the people who collect the food. There is no system. Their names are not anywhere. There's no ID. And also, we have filmed your food being sold at astronomical prices on the black market. Reverend Johnny Moore, I just have a question for you. Deborah. Do you have anything positive to say whatsoever about what we're doing? We've made a decision. And the decision is that it's worth operating in a war zone with all the complexity and all the risk. As deadly as it is. Because Gazans deserve food. Interviewer, and that is laudable. So my challenge to you is, take us in. Let me come and see it for myself and report the good and the bad. Because if there is nothing to hide and this process is exactly how you're explaining it, and you're saying it's a good process, then let us film it. Be transparent. Reverend Johnny Moore, that's not a decision I could make alone. I mean, there are lots of different aspects of that, including the diversion of resources solely dedicated to the people of Gaza. I would like to see from a few people in the press a little less cynicism. A little less cynicism from us. Jeremy. So, that was Reverend Johnny Moore, who is an evangelical leader and is now the new head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, saying there are no mass casualty events. But also you can't come and see and verify for yourself. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. First of all, we have to understand this not as an independent entity, but as an agent of the Israeli state. That's how Netanyahu and other Israeli officials have spoken about it. Mainstream. Major news organizations including NPR, the BBC, and the Washington Post have recently done exposés where American mercenaries who went to Gaza as part of this aid scam actually described the lethal actions of their own operatives. We have Palestinians that have filmed the aftermath of these shootings. We have doctors, including international doctors in Gaza, that have described the sorts of wounds, and fatal wounds, that they have treated in the aftermath of people desperately trying to go and get what is actually a pittance of aid. While this clip sort of went viral and was portrayed as a gotcha moment, the journalist actually engaged in what I think is a bit of journalistic malpractice. She started questioning him about Hamas diverting the aid. Senior U.S. officials, including the head humanitarian officer from the Biden era, have said that there's no evidence of any significant theft of aid by Hamas. But just this morning and over the past few days, Yasser Abu Shabab, who is the head of an Israeli and Palestinian Authority-backed militia in Gaza, has openly said in Hebrew-language media interviews that his forces have stolen aid to then distribute it to people that they want to give it to. So, yes, there were really important things that came out of that interview. But also the journalist wasted so much time in her questioning based on an entirely false premise. The reality is, and I don't think anyone can dispute this, Israel has used food as a weapon of war. And the Israeli cabinet over the weekend voted to intensify the use of food as a weapon of war. They are rejecting putting in charge a neutral, independent body that had a very effective system for distributing aid. And it was not being stolen by Hamas. That's just a fact. So Jeremy, I have to get your take on this Wall Street Journal piece from Elliot Kaufman that was published over the last couple of days. This is E2. We can put it up on the screen. I mean, it's just fascinating for a lot of reasons. Especially from somebody who follows this even just as a student of the media coverage. Like yourself. Jeremy. A new Palestinian offer for peace with Israel. Hebron sheikhs propose to leave the Palestinian Authority and join the Abraham Accords. The reaction to this peace from people in the region. Jeremy. Was really fascinating. Could you tell us, first of all, what you make of the journal dropping this story a couple of days before Netanyahu's visit and, basically, some of the reaction that has poured out since it was published? I mean, throughout the history of Israel's occupation, you've always had small clusters of Palestinians that have sort of appeared to be more pro-Israeli or, maybe for their own reasons, want to try to cut a deal. The reality is, this is a tiny fraction of the Palestinian population that is making this offer. And it's not even clear that they speak for the entire community of Hebron. You know, often when these stories come up that appear to be presenting an alternative to established Palestinian political figures or movements that are about Palestinian liberation, they get an enormous amount of attention in the West. The reality is that this is basically a non-story on the ground in Palestine. People are concerned about the genocide in Gaza. And they're concerned about the largest forced displacement campaign in the occupied West Bank since 1967. 15 members of Netanyahu's party, the Likud party, over the weekend wrote a letter to Netanyahu saying now is the time to formally annex the entire territory of the occupied West Bank. So, these kinds of stories, you know, may be appealing to an op-ed writer in the Wall Street Journal or sort of fun for coffee talk among people that delude themselves into believing that somehow you can co-opt the Palestinian liberation struggle. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of Palestinians, in poll after poll, support the idea that they need an independent homeland. That it needs to be a unified one that connects both Gaza, the occupied West Bank, and Jerusalem. So, I think that we have to look at this through the lens of who's really promoting this story because we're really talking about a tiny fraction of the Palestinian population that is advocating for this solution. Lastly, Jeremy. Just to circle back to the meeting today with Trump and Netanyahu. They'll obviously also be discussing Iran. Tucker Carlson just dropped his interview with the president of Iran. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I'm seeing some of the clips floating around. Apparently, he was asked about the supposed Iranian sleeper cells in the U.S. He denies that and says this is just being used basically to scare Americans. He also apparently revealed, or claimed, that Israel had tried to assassinate him. Which I don't think would be a big surprise to anyone. In any case, what is your understanding of what Israel's interest is with regard to Iran? What they would like to do? What they would like us to do on their behalf? And what Trump's own orientation towards Iran is at this point? Well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Netanyahu wants full-scale regime change in Iran. And you know, to his credit, even though there was a lot of speculation that Trump was going to go forward and actually assassinate the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And you know, bankroll and arm Israel as it actually enacted regime change in Iran. It doesn't seem to be, as of now, the direction that the United States wants to go in. But I think it's very likely that we will again see bombing of Iran. Whether it's only Israel or Israel and the United States remains to be seen. But, you know, Iran, time and again, has defied people's declarations that the end of the government is just on the horizon. And you know, it really speaks to the bankrupt nature of the political media in the United States that it's left to Tucker Carlson to do interviews not just with the president of Iran but with other figures that the United States has designated as official enemies. Anytime you get to hear the perspective of the people on the other side of American missiles, It helps to inform a society that purports to be democratic. So, we should have more hearing from people that live on the other side of American missiles. And at the end of the day, whether you're a conservative or a liberal or you're a political radical of some sort, more information means a better ability to make decisions. And I think there is a fundamental question that shouldn't only belong to the MAGA movement. And that is, what is fundamentally in the U.S. interest? I would argue that none of these wars are in the U.S. interest. And I know that there's a minority section of Trump world that also, for their own reasons, believes that same thing. We can't continue this bankrupt neocon view of the world that the United States can be a hammer in search of nails. And we certainly shouldn't be doing Israel's agenda. Because what Netanyahu wants, and clearly he has a lot of support for this in Israel, is to continue setting that region on fire. What may seem to be tactical victories right now in the short term could well produce a generation of people that seek to oppose the United States and Israel, who are far more radical than any of the forces that we now see in the region. It's born of an idea called blowback. And I think that, Netanyahu can try to do his victory dance, being the only leader that's been invited 3 times to see Trump. But Americans should really be asking, and I see increasingly conservatives asking this question. Major media figures in the conservative ecosystem are asking these questions. And I think it's important. Why is the United States doing the bidding of this rogue regime in Israel? That is a serious question that should be on the table right now for all Americans. Jeremy Scahill. Well said as always. And great to see you, sir. Thank you so much for your reporting. Thank you both. As the world watches the high-stakes meeting between these leaders, the gap between political maneuvering and the devastating human reality on the ground has never been wider. The debates over language, withdrawal lines, and aid control in Washington feel a world away from the daily struggle for survival in Gaza. But true peace cannot be built on backroom deals alone. It must be rooted in justice, accountability, and the recognition of the fundamental human rights of all people, both Palestinian and Israeli. The path forward requires not just the will of politicians, but the unwavering demand of ordinary citizens for an end to the violence and the beginning of a new chapter, one where a just and lasting peace is not just a distant dream, but a tangible reality for all. That was a powerful analysis from Jeremy Scahill. If you value these in-depth conversations that challenge the mainstream narrative, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Click that like button and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue to bring you the independent journalism you won't find anywhere else. Thanks for watching.